CSS frameworks provide us with a collection of pre-written styles, components, and also layout tools that we can use to build websites faster and more efficiently. They provide us with a toolbox of pre-styled buttons, navigation bars, grids, and even pre-built responsive layouts and many other components and styles. But like any other tool, CSS frameworks have their pros and cons. One of the main advantages of frameworks is that they speed up development by providing ready-made components and styles, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel for common elements like buttons or layouts. They also ensure a consistent look and feel across your website, and they make sure that it looks professional and user-friendly. And most of them come with built-in responsive features, and they make it easier to create websites that adapt to different screen sizes. The downside of using frameworks is that each framework has its own unique syntax and conventions, and it requires some initial learning from us. They also come with potential bloat, and you might not use all of these styles and components that the framework provides, and that can lead to unused code, which can slow down your website. And they are less flexible, so if you want a highly customized design that doesn't fit the framework's predefined styles, you have to do a lot of customizability, but that can be hard with frameworks. But in most cases, these disadvantages have workarounds, and most of the small to medium companies use some sort of framework to speed up their development. Now let's explore the popular CSS frameworks. As you can see, around 2012 we only had Bootstrap, which is the most widely used framework and it's known for its components and grid system. But then other tools came out like Foundation, which is a flexible and customizable framework with a focus on mobile-first design. We also have UIKit, which is a lightweight and modular framework with a wide range of components. Another option is Semantic UI, which emphasizes semantic class names for better readability. We have Bulma, which is a modern and responsive framework based on Flexbox. And then we got Tailwind CSS, which became more and more popular nowadays. And currently Tailwind has more weekly downloads on NPM than Bootstrap, and it's slowly becoming more popular. It's a utility-first framework that gives you more control over styling with pre-built classes instead of components like Bootstrap. And we will explore Tailwind and Bootstrap because they both are the most popular frameworks compared to others, and they are widely used in web projects. And while both of these can be useful, they take very different approaches. Bootstrap provides us with ready-made components and structured layouts which can be used to speed up development, but it also might limit our design flexibility. And on the other hand, Tailwind is more flexible and it allows for greater customization, but it requires a deeper understanding of CSS concepts and may involve writing more code upfront. And if you imagine a spectrum where one end represents high convention but less flexibility, and the other end represents high customization but requires more configuration, Bootstrap would be on the far left of this spectrum. It provides a quick and easy way to build standard layouts and styles, but it is less flexible. And Tailwind CSS would be somewhere in the middle. It offers a balance of predefined utilities and also customization options. And pure CSS would be on the far right. It gives you the complete freedom of designing your websites, but it requires you to build everything from scratch. So if you want complete control over your design and you don't mind some initial learning, then Tailwind CSS might be a great fit. And otherwise, if you're a beginner or you want a quick way to build a website with a wide range of pre-styled components, then Bootstrap is a solid choice for you. In my opinion, you should learn CSS first to be able to customize your designs as you want. Then you can learn Tailwind and learn how to build those websites faster with writing less CSS. And then you can learn Bootstrap because it gives you a lot of abstraction. And that's why in the next lesson we will learn Tailwind CSS and then we'll move on to Bootstrap. Now that we have a solid understanding of what CSS frameworks are, let's dive into one of the most popular options out there, Tailwind CSS. Tailwind CSS takes a unique approach to styling called utility first, and instead of providing pre-designed components like Bootstrap does, Tailwind gives you a vast collection of low-level utility classes, and then you can use these classes like individual building blocks of CSS to control specific properties like margins, paddings, colors, and more. For example, this is a component built with Tailwind CSS. You can see that we have applied many classes to this component, and each class in this example corresponds to a specific CSS property or value. For example, the first one sets the background color to light gray, the second one applies paddings of 4 units on all sides, and so on. And by combining these utility classes, we can quickly style our HTML without writing any custom CSS. And since we're working with individual CSS properties, we have complete control over the look and feel of our components. Tailwind also names everything for you, so you don't have to spend time coming up with class names. And it comes with a large number of utility classes like this, which can result in a larger initial CSS file. However, Tailwind has a built-in feature called purging, and that removes all of the unused classes from the production, and this reduces the CSS file size, and it also makes sure that you only have the classes which you used in your code. And many developers complain that using many utility classes can make your HTML look a bit verbose, but this is easily solvable by installing some of the extensions like inline fold. And with that, it collapses all of the class names and you can click on them to view the classes, and otherwise they are hidden and you can read your HTML code easily with this extension. To set up Tailwind, first ensure you have Node.js and npm installed on your machine from nodejs.org. Then we need to go to the installation guide in the Tailwind CSS and we need to install Tailwind with this command. So create a new project directory and navigate to the terminal there and paste this command and hit enter. This will install Tailwind CSS and all of its dependencies, and you will see this package.json which has the Tailwind dependency inside of it, and also the node modules which contains Tailwind CSS and all of its dependencies. Next, we need to run this command to generate the configuration files, and this will generate the tailwind.config.js file. Here we need to modify this content and include all of the paths to our HTML files. In our case, we'll just create one index.html file and we'll place it in the root of our directories, so we can configure it like this. Next, we need to create a new CSS file and let's name this to be input.css. And here we need to add the directives to import Tailwind space styles, components and also utilities. And with that, we can start the build process in our terminal with Tailwind CLI. We can run this command to start the Tailwind CLI build process. This first part uses the package that we just installed, and we specify the I flag which stands for the input file, and that is our input.css that we just created. And the next part stands for the output, and for the output we will save it inside of the output.css. This will be the compiled file. And we also add the -- watch flag at the end to make sure it watches for changes real time. If we hit enter, you can see the output.css was generated by it automatically. And with that we can start using Tailwind. We can create the index.html file at the root. Let's generate a basic skeleton for this, and all we have to do here is to link our style sheet. So we will create a link. The type of this will be style sheet, and we will point this to the generated output.css file. And now we can start using Tailwind CSS classes in this HTML file, and the CLI here will automatically rebuild the CSS whenever you save changes to your input file. Now that we have Tailwind set up, let's create a simple checkout page like this one, and let's see how Tailwind can help us build this without writing any CSS and just using the utility classes that Tailwind provides us. First, let's create a heading for this page and let's name this as checkout, and let's also rename the title of this page. If we save it like this and open this with live server, you can see our checkout heading at the top left corner. And now let's style this with Tailwind. We probably want to make the font of this a bit larger, so let's give it a class name. And we can apply text for Excel, for example, from Tailwind classes. And if we save this, now it looks better. And we can also make the font of this to be bold. And we can apply text center, which will center this heading. And if we save this, you can see that now we have applied a couple of styles without writing any CSS. And now let's apply some spacings from top and bottom. And if you wonder how I remember these class names that I applied here, I don't. I just use the Tailwind documentation. And in fact, no one memorizes these styles. And if you need to apply something, you just do a quick search here in Tailwind website's documentation. For instance, now I'm interested how to apply margins from top and bottom. I can search for margin here. And now we can go to the margin section, and here are all the classes, and in front of them we can see the properties, and here we can search for the ones that we need to apply. In our case, I want to apply some margin from the top and bottom of this heading, and I can search for margin top here, and I can scan through this. And if we have a look here, you can see that MY stands for margin on the vertical axis, meaning it applies margin top and margin bottom. By default, this is 0, but we can search for something where margin Y is, let's say, 5 or 6. And here you can see that margin top, for example, here is 20 pixels and also from the bottom. Let's go back and apply that style. So we will apply margin Y to B5, and this will add the margin top and bottom to our heading. And now it will have some spacings from top and bottom. And lastly, let's change the color of this text. And again, we can go back to Tailwind, and here we can search for color and specifically text color. If we select this, you can see all of the colors that can be applied. Let's say I want to apply this color in our heading, so I can just copy this class name from here and we can paste it near the margin Y. And let's also make this margin Y to be 6, a bit larger, and save. And with that we have the color of our heading. So now we need to make the background a bit darker because this is not readable on the white screen. And for that we can apply another class to our body. We can apply class here and set this to be background slate 900. And again I searched this from the Tailwind CSS docs. And if we save, now this looks better and we can start creating the form of the checkout below this. And you'll notice that the class names are collapsed and they are only expanded when I click on them. And this is because of this inline fold extension that I suggested. And if you download and enable that, you can have these similar results and you can collapse and expand this easily. Now below this, we will create a form to collect the data in the checkout page. For the full name and email address, we can group them together and we can create a field set component. And typically we add a legend element at the top of this. In our case, it will be this billing details. So we can paste the billing details here. Next, below this, we can create the two inputs, which are the full name and the email address. To create the input, you usually create a div wrapper, which wraps this input. And then you create a label, which indicates the name of this input. In our case, the first one is full name. And below that, we have the input, which is a self-closing tag. For the input, you typically specify the type of this input. It can, for example, be password input, email input, and in our case, this will be just a text input. It's important to give an ID to this input, and for this one, it will be the name. And another important property needs to be applied to the label, and that is the for attribute, and this needs to be exactly the same as the ID for that input. And that means we need to name this as name, as we had for the ID of this input. And after that, on the input, we have another important property, and that is the name. This will be used after the form is submitted, so we will get key value pairs. For example, for the full name, we will get the name of this input and then the value that was provided by users. And we select that by this name property. Typically, we name this as we have it for the ID of this input, and that will be the same as name. And since this can be confusing, let's just rename this to be full name. And let's just copy and paste this for the ID and also for the for on the label. And now with that, we can start styling this. Let's first have a look what we have now currently. We have this legend of billing details and then the label of this input and then the input on the right side. For now, we don't have any styling. So let's go back and apply some styles to our form and also our elements below it. For the form, let's add a class name. Let's first apply some background to this. You'll apply background to be white. And with that, you can see we have the white background for our form. And in our final form design, you can see that it's not that white. It's not taking the 100% of our screen, and it's also centered. And to apply that to our form, we will use the maximum width utility class, and we will set the maximum width of this to be medium. If you look at the documentation, you can see that maximum width corresponds to 448 pixels or 28 rems. With that, we will have some maximum width applied to it. Now to center this, we know that in CSS, we would apply margin auto from the sides of it. And we have a class for that in Tailwind, and that is mx auto. This utility class applies the horizontal spacing to it, and specifically it applies margin right auto and also margin left auto. And if we save it like this, we will see our form is centered now. Let's also apply some internal paddings for this form to not have these internal components right on the edges. We can apply paddings with this padding utility class. You just say p and then the size of the padding. For example, this can be 5, 6 and so on. Let's apply 6 units of padding. Let's also round the corner, and for that we can use the rounded class, and this will apply rounded border. We can set it to medium or to large or to small. Let's set this to large. And let's also add some shadows to it with the shadow utility class. And with that we have our form styles. Now let's move on to styling this legend inside of the form. We need to make the text of it a bit larger and also make it bold or semi-bold, and also apply some spacing between this and the full name label. We can add class name to the legend and we can make the text large first, so we can use the text large utility class. And let's make the font of this semi-bold. We can use font semi-bold for that. And let's add some spacing below this, and for that we can use margin bottom and then specify the unit, let's say 2, and save. And with that we have the legend styled, and you can see we are just writing some descriptive styles, and with that we have every styling we need, and we might need some custom scenarios, but in most cases we can just use all of the utility classes that Tailwind provides us. Now let's move to styling this label of the full name. Again we will apply some of the utility classes from Tailwind. First let's apply the text size of this to be small. Next let's make the font of this to be medium. Let's set the color of this to be text gray and 700 shade. And we can also set this element to be block, and this will move the input element below it instead of near each other. Next let's apply this border to the input element that we have. For that we will add the class name here, and let's set the border utility class, and this will automatically apply that border. Let's also round the corner by setting rounded medium. And let's set this to take the full width of the form, and for that we will set the W full, which means that it will take the full width. And now we have the border and also the rounded corners for this input. Let's also apply some paddings to make this larger, and also some margin from the full name. We will apply margin top to be 1 unit, and this will add the spacing between the label and input. And we will also apply internal paddings, and let's set this to be 2 units. And with that we have the first input ready. Now we can just copy and paste this for the email input here. We can just duplicate this div, and let's rename this to be email instead of full name. So this will be email address. And we need to change all of the 4 ID and name properties, and we will name this to be email. And with that we have our 2 inputs. Now as you see we have some spacing between them, and we can easily add that by applying spacings to our divs. We can set a class name and add some margins from the bottom, and let's set this to be 4 units. And let's just copy and paste this for the other div as well. And that's how easy we got the first part of our form without writing any CSS, by just using the utility classes of the Tailwind. Now we can easily replicate this for the card details. We have the same inputs and the same components here. We can just copy this field set and rename the legend component here. Let's just set this to be card details. And here we will just need to rename the labels and inputs of our form. For the first one the label will be card number, and we will need to rename the label of this to be card underscore number. The second input will be expiration date of the card, so let's say expiration date. And we'll need to change the for and ID attributes to be card expiry. And let's just duplicate this one more time. And the last one will be the CVC code of the card. Let's name this to be CVC. And instead of card expiry, here we will rename this to be card CVC. And now if we save and go back, you can see we easily have the card details with the card number, expiration date and CVC applied. And now let's create this payment method section, and then lastly we will add the submit button. And here for the email input we can just change this type to be email. This will just add extra convenience, and it will be easier for users to understand that this is an email input. And between these field sets we need to add another field set, and this one will be for selecting the payment method. We will have the same legend styling here, so let's just copy one of these legends and we'll just rename this to be payment method. And below that we will need to have 3 inputs, one for credit card, for PayPal and also for Stripe. Let's wrap each of them inside of a div, and let's create the label of the first one. This will be the credit card option. And let's create the input for this one, and the type of this will be radio, which is a radio button. And we need to apply name to this, and let's name this to be payment method. And let's also apply the ID, and for simplicity let's just set it to be the same name. And if we save and go back, we have the payment method legend and the field set, and the first radio button here, which is the credit card. Now let's style that radio button to look like this. So we need to have the checkbox from the left side and the radio button from the right side, and also the font size of this is a bit smaller, and we need to apply some spacing between them. First, let's apply the for attribute to the label and set this to be the same as the ID of this input. And next we can apply class name to this. Let's set the text size to be small and the font to be medium. And we will apply text color to be text gray 700 shadow. And we will apply some utility classes for the input. The first one will be form radio. First, let's set some height and width to it to be 4 units. And this will just make the radio button a bit larger. And now to move this to the right side, we will just change the order in our code. We can just move the label to be below the input. And with that, we will change the order. And you can see they are not aligned vertically. Now we know that in CSS we would apply flexbox here, but Tailwind gives us utility classes for that as well. And that is the flex class. And we can use the items center to align them vertically. And if we save and go back, you can see we have the desired styles here. We just need to apply some spacings between them. For that, we can just apply some spacing on the label and set the margin from the left to be 3 units. And with that, we have one of our checkboxes. Now we can duplicate this for the PayPal and also for the Stripe. We can just duplicate this div 2 more times. And let's rename this to be PayPal and this one to be Stripe. And with that, we have 3 of our inputs here. Now we need to just apply some spacing between them. We can either apply space button for each of these divs, but an easier way that Tailwind provides us is by wrapping this inside of another div. And with that, we can just apply some class on the parent div, and that will be space y, and then the unit of spacing, which in our case can be 3 or 4. And that automatically applies the spacing for these items that are wrapped within this div. And let's apply this same spacing for our form. And this will apply spacings between our field sets. And let's set this to be 3 units. And with that, we also apply the spacing between our payment method, the billing details, and also the card details. And lastly, let's create this place order button, which will submit our form. Here, let's just make the first input to be checked. And for that, we can apply the checked attribute. And with that, the first one is automatically checked. And now we just need to create a button at the bottom of our form. We can create a button element and the type of this will be submit, which means that this will submit the form when it's clicked. And inside of it we can have the text like place the order. Initially here is how our button looks like, and we need to apply stylings to this to take the full width and also to have some color and borders. For that we will add the class names to the button. The first one will be to take full width and that is W full. Next, we will set the background color for this to be background blue 500 shade. And we need the place order text to be in white, so we will set the text white property. Let's also make the font to be bold. And let's add some internal paddings to this to be 2. We will apply some margin from the top, and that is margin top. And let's set this to 4. And also let's set the corners to be rounded and save. And with that, we quickly created this checkout form and we didn't write any CSS. We just leveraged the styles that Tailwind provides us. And in our terminal, it automatically compiles the used styles and it writes them in the output.css. And we just read that output CSS in our HTML file. And once you are done with creating the elements in the HTML, you can stop this process in the terminal. And here you can optimize it for production before deploying the app, and that is with this command in Tailwind. You can copy and paste it here, and you just need to rename this build CSS to be the name of your output CSS. And what that will do is it will remove all of these comments and all of the unnecessary lines from here, and it will minify this CSS file so that it's smaller and it loads faster for the users. If I hit enter here, you can see that it compressed this to just be one line and it removed all of the unnecessary lines from here. And if you open your index.html with live server, you still have the same results, but now your CSS file is minified and it is faster to load than the initial CSS file that you had. And as you see, we are using simple utility classes which are very descriptive, and with that we can achieve very flexible results and you can add your custom styles, but in most cases Tailwind has all of these styles that you need. And whenever you need to apply some styles like margins for example, you just go ahead and search it in the Tailwind documentation and you find the class names that you need. You don't need to memorize all of the classes. Of course, the ones that you use often, you will remember them. But still, there are tons of classes here and you don't need to remember all of them. You just need to search for them whenever is needed and find the ones that you need in your project. Now let's build that same checkout page but with Bootstrap, and let's see how it compares to Tailwind. If you go to the Bootstrap website, you can see we have two ways to get started with it. The first one is by installing the npm package, and you can also use the CDN version and link to their CSS and also to their JavaScript files. Let's go back and copy the HTML structure of the checkout page because it will stay the same. And I will just create a new project for this one, and let's create the index.html file. Let's populate it with the same structure that we had from the previous one. We'll just need to rename the classes here to match the Bootstrap styles, and we also need to change the links to the style sheet. As you can see here, we can just copy the CDN link for the CSS, and we can replace this with the Bootstrap CSS. And we can also copy the script for the JavaScript, and we need to paste this at the bottom of the body right after the form element and save this. And this will be enough to link Bootstrap to your project. But this is not the recommended way for Bootstrap. You can use this for playing around with Bootstrap styles and learning it. But if you want to deliver it to final users, you will likely install it with npm package manager. And then you also need to purge the styles, because by default Bootstrap gives you all of these styles and you might not use all of them. And there are ways to remove the unused CSS, for example by using purge CSS or creating a custom Bootstrap build. And to be able to do that at the end, you need to get started with the npm package manager. So we'll copy this script and we'll paste it in our terminal here, and this will install the Bootstrap package. And after installing it, we need to change this link to point to our node modules instead of the CDN. And you can check the location inside of your node modules, but typically this will be installed inside of your node modules Bootstrap, and inside of the dist folder you will have CSS. And here you will have the Bootstrap min CSS, and this will be the minified version of your CSS in Bootstrap. And we can remove all of the unnecessary properties from here and save this. And similarly, you need to change the link to your JavaScript file. Instead of pointing to the CDN, you need to point to your node modules. And that will be located inside of the node modules Bootstrap, again this folder, but in JavaScript folder, and it will be named Bootstrap bundle min.js. This is the minified version of that JavaScript file. And again, you can get rid of all of the unnecessary properties here and save your file. And now we are ready to get started styling this checkout page. Let's open this with a live server. This is what we have currently. Obviously all of our styles are gone from the Tailwind, and we need to apply the Bootstrap styles for that. First we need to wrap all of this inside of a container and give it a fixed width. For that, Bootstrap uses the container classes. It gives you this container class which you can use to wrap your elements inside of it. We can group all of this together and create a div element that will wrap all of this. And let's give it a class name to be the container in Bootstrap. And let's paste everything inside of this. And that applies the container stylings. Now we need to center this and also style the heading. First, let's change the body background color. And you can search for the background colors in the Bootstrap to see the colors available in here. In our case, we can apply background dark to this. Instead of background slate 900, which is a Tailwind class, let's apply background dark. And this is how it will look like. Now let's style the heading, which is not visible anymore. Let's remove all of these styles from here. First, let's apply text to be white, and you can see some similarities in Bootstrap and Tailwind in terms of classes. For example, for margins, we will also use the margin Y and set the unit of this. Let's set this to 4. And let's enter this with the text center property. And that will style our checkout heading. Next, we need to style the form, apply rounded corners to it, and also make the width of it a bit smaller. Now, background white is still a valid class in Bootstrap, but we need to remove all of the other classes from here. Let's set the internal padding of this to be 4 units. Let's set the corners to be rounded. We will apply the shadow with the shadow class. And to center this, we again have the MX Auto, which is the same as in Tailwind. And that will round the corners. Now we need to set maximum width to this. Now here is where Bootstrap doesn't provide us with such a class. So we need to use a custom class like max width medium, which was available in Tailwind. And in our case, we need to create this class. So we need to create a style.css file and apply these styles here. For example, for this class, we need to apply maximum width to be 28 rems. And now let's link that in our HTML file. We'll create another style sheet link, and that will point to our style.css and save this. And with that, we have the form style link. Now let's move on to styling the individual field set. Here we need to first style the legend of the first section, and let's set this to be heading 5. And also apply some margins from the bottom, and that will be margin bottom and then the unit that you need to specify. And that will be the styling of the legend element, and let's copy and paste that for the payment method and also card details. We will just copy these class names and paste it for this one, which is the payment method, and also for this one, which is the card details. Now let's style the label and the input inside of this form. And that will be pretty easy in Bootstrap. We don't need to apply any class names to the label, so we can get rid of this here. And we just need to apply class name to this input, and we need to set this to be form control. And this is a class name that is coming from Bootstrap, and if I apply this, we immediately get this input in the styled format, and all we need to do is to apply the same styling for the email address input and all of the other inputs. We'll copy this class name and we'll replace it in other places where we have inputs, and we will also get rid of the class names on the label components. And I will apply the same for the card details here, and we'll remove these class names of the labels from here. If we save that, we already have the basic structure ready. Let's just apply some spacings from the bottom of this payment method, and that is this field set, and we can set the class name to this to have margin bottom, let's say 4 units, and that will add the necessary spacing. And the last thing we need to do is to style this button. And that's also an easy thing in Bootstrap. We just need to apply 2 styles here. The first one will be we'll apply the button styles, and then we will set this to be primary button with button primary class name. Now you can see this is not full width, and to apply that, Bootstrap provides us with a grid component. We need to apply this div wrapper to it, which sets the display to be grid, and then the button inside of it will take the full space that is available to it. So let's just copy this class name here. And let's create a div wrapper and give it this class name. And we need to move our button inside of this div and save it. And as you can see, this took us a lot less time than building it with Tailwind. But of course with Tailwind we have more customizability and more control over the components. But on the other hand, Bootstrap was very easy to use, and it is more beginner friendly, and you can get started with it easily than with Tailwind. It also comes with rich component library, things like headers, features, sidebars, footers, and anything you would need in a website. But both Bootstrap and Tailwind come with responsive features, and it is very easy to create a responsive design using one of these tools. And as I mentioned initially, both Bootstrap and Tailwind come with large CSS files, which includes all of the class names and all of the components. But both of them allow you to optimize for the production. For example, Tailwind allows you to minify your CSS file before going to production, and it also removes the unused styles for you. And in case of Bootstrap, you can use the Purge CSS and other tools or your custom build tools to remove the unused styles from your final CSS, and you can still minify the file before going to production and before deploying this to a real server.